I never wanted my father's money. I just wanted the truth. Those were the last words I spoke before my stepbrother smiled, folded his hands across the polished oak table, and told me I wasn't getting a single dollar. The attorney sitting beside him didn't even look surprised. My father's funeral had ended less than 3 hours earlier. The flowers were still fresh. His favorite jazz record was probably still spinning in the empty living room of the house where I grew up. Yet my family had already moved on to dividing everything he had spent 42 years building, including the life he promised would always belong to me. My father would never do this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My stepmother, Diane, leaned back in her chair with a calm expression that almost looked rehearsed. Your father changed his mind before he died. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a copy of the will. Every asset, every investment, every property, every account, everything had been transferred to Diane and her son, Brandon. My name appeared exactly once. $1. I stared at the page until the words blurred together. You expect me to believe this? The attorney cleared his throat. The documents are legally signed and witnessed. Brandon couldn't hide his grin. I guess Dad finally realized who actually cared about him. That sentence hit harder than losing the inheritance. For the last 7 years, I had driven 4 hours every weekend to help my father after his heart surgery. I handled repairs around the house, took him to doctor's appointments, paid bills when he forgot, and spent holidays beside him while Brandon was posting vacation photos from ski resorts and beach clubs. Dad used to joke that I knew the house better than he did. Now, I was being told I meant nothing. Diane stood first. I think we're finished here. I didn't move. Something inside me refused to accept what everyone else in the room had already decided. Because my father wasn't careless, he noticed everything. He once returned to a grocery store because the cashier accidentally undercharged him by $6. That man wouldn't suddenly erase his own daughter without leaving an explanation. As I walked toward the parking lot, rain began falling across the cemetery road. I looked back once. For a second, I could almost hear Dad laughing the way he always did whenever life became difficult. Then I remembered something. 3 months before he died, he had looked unusually nervous. If anything strange happens after I'm gone, he had whispered, while pretending to watch a baseball game, don't believe the first story you hear. At the time, I laughed. Now, those words echoed inside my head like a warning. I drove straight to his house. The locks had already been changed. Brandon opened the front door just enough to smile at me. You don't live here anymore. I just want Dad's watch. It's ours now. He closed the door in my face. Standing on that porch, soaked by rain, I finally understood something. They weren't just keeping the inheritance away from me. They were trying to erase every trace that I had ever belonged in that family. If you're enjoying this story so far, subscribe to Legacy Whisper, because what happened next proved that the most dangerous secrets are never buried with the dead. For the next week, I barely slept. Friends told me to accept the loss. Lawyers quietly hinted that challenging the will could take years and cost more money than I could afford. Everyone repeated the same sentence. It's over. But every night, I remembered my father's voice. Don't believe the first story you hear. Then something impossible happened. A retired mail carrier named Walter knocked on my apartment door. He held an old envelope that looked as if it had been hiding somewhere for months. My conscience wouldn't let me throw this away, he said softly. The instructions said to deliver it only if, well, he looked down before finishing, only if your father died. My heart stopped. The envelope wasn't addressed in my father's handwriting, but the signature on the back seal was unmistakably his. And before I could even break the seal, a black SUV rolled slowly to the curb across the street. Someone inside was already watching me. Walter's face turned pale the moment he noticed the SUV. You should go inside, he whispered. Do you know them? I asked. He hesitated for a second too long. I know enough to tell you that your father never trusted them. Before I could ask another question, the SUV pulled away without making a sound. Walter let out a slow breath. I wasn't supposed to keep this envelope. Your father gave it to me 6 months ago. He said if anything happened to him, and if you were left with nothing, I had to deliver it personally. Why didn't you bring it sooner? I tried. He looked genuinely ashamed. "Twice I came to your father's house, but your stepbrother answered the door. He told me you'd moved to another state. Something didn't feel right, so I kept looking for you." I thanked him before locking my apartment door. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. My father's seal was still intact. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first line made my hands shake. "Emily, if you're reading this, then I was right." They didn't wait. My father went on to explain something that sounded impossible. For nearly 2 years, he believed someone inside the family had been manipulating his finances. Small transfers disappeared from investment accounts. Important documents were moved. Passwords changed without his knowledge. Whenever he confronted Diane, she always had an explanation. Whenever he questioned Brandon, the missing money somehow reappeared. He never had enough proof, but he had plenty of suspicion. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "The will they show you is not the one I signed." I read those words 3 times. Dad explained that his real will had been prepared months earlier by another attorney, someone he'd known since college. He never told Diane because he wanted to see who he could still trust. "If you're holding this letter," he wrote, "it means they made their move before the truth could come out." Folded behind the letter was a small key. No note, no label, just a silver key with the number 218 engraved on it. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. A man's calm voice said, "Some things are better left unopened." The line went dead. I immediately called the number back. Disconnected. Someone knew about the letter. That wasn't possible, unless they'd been watching Walter. The next morning, I drove to the only place that made sense. My father's old bank. A manager with silver hair studied the key for only a second. "I haven't seen one of these in years." He disappeared into the back office. When he returned, his expression had completely changed. "Miss Carter, this key belongs to a private safety deposit box." My heartbeat quickened. "I'd like to open it." "I'm sorry." He lowered his voice. "According to our records, someone already requested access yesterday." "What?" "They claimed they were acting on behalf of your father's estate." "Who are I allowed to disclose names?" "But they didn't get in." I froze. "Why not?" "Because your father left one instruction." The manager reached into a folder. "No one opens box 218 unless my daughter Emily is standing in the room." For the first time since the funeral, I smiled. Dad had planned for this. Minutes later, we entered the secure vault. The manager unlocked the first lock. My key opened the second. Inside wasn't stacks of cash or jewelry. There was a thick brown file, a USB drive, and another sealed envelope with my name on it. Before I could touch any of them, the bank's emergency alarm suddenly echoed through the building. Employees began shouting. The manager looked toward the hallway. Then he whispered 4 words that turned my blood cold. "They found you already." The alarm echoed through the vault like a warning that came years too late. The bank manager quickly shut the safety deposit box and looked directly at me. "Take the file and the USB. Leave the envelope until we're somewhere safe." "What is happening?" I asked. "I don't know for certain," he admitted, "but security just reported that 2 men demanded access to this vault. They knew your father's name." My pulse pounded in my ears. He slipped the file into a plain canvas bag and led me through an employee hallway instead of the main lobby. Outside, police cars were already pulling into the parking lot. For one hopeful second, I thought someone had called them to protect me. Then I saw Brandon talking to one of the officers. He pointed toward the building. Toward me. "There she is." I instinctively stepped back. The bank manager grabbed my arm. "Don't run. It'll only make you look guilty." Within minutes, the misunderstanding was cleared. Brandon had reported that I'd attempted to steal estate property. The officer listened carefully before asking a simple question. "Do you have proof this box belongs to you?" The bank manager answered before I could. "Her father left written instructions. She is the only authorized person allowed to open it." Brandon's confident smile disappeared. Diane arrived only moments later, looking surprisingly calm. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. Instead, she looked at me with a smile that chilled me more than anger ever could. "You always did enjoy making scenes." I held up my father's handwritten letter. He knew. for the first time. Her expression cracked, only for a second, but I saw it. She recovered quickly, a dying man's. Confusion doesn't change legal documents. Maybe not. I looked directly into her eyes, but evidence does. The color drained from Brandon's face. Without another word, Diane grabbed his arm and hurried him back to their car. Neither of them asked what was inside the file. That told me everything they already knew. Back at my apartment, I finally opened the brown file. It contained copies of bank transfers dating back almost 3 years. Each one showed money quietly moving from my father's personal accounts into shell companies. Every company traced back to one person, Brandon Hayes. My stomach turned. There were also printed emails. Some had been deleted from Dad's computer, but preserved by his financial advisor. One message from Diane read, "He's getting suspicious. Finish the paperwork before he changes everything." Another replied from Brandon, "I'll handle Emily." I stared at those 3 words. I'll handle Emily. What had they planned? The USB drive contained even more photos, scanned contracts, medical records, then one video file. The recording showed my father sitting alone in his study. His face looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "If you're watching this, Emily," he began, "then they succeeded in stealing what belongs to you. At least for a while." He explained that after discovering missing money, he secretly hired a forensic accountant. The investigation uncovered over $2 million that had disappeared through fake consulting companies controlled by Brandon. When Dad threatened to call federal investigators, Diane begged him not to destroy the family. Instead, they convinced him he was becoming forgetful. Doctors suddenly began prescribing stronger medication. Friends were told he had memory problems. Even I had noticed him becoming confused during his final months. Now I understood why. The medication list in the file revealed something horrifying. The dosage had been quietly increased without authorization. Not enough to kill him, just enough to make everyone question his memory. My hands trembled with anger. A father hadn't been losing his mind. Someone had been stealing it. Then the video reached its final minute. "If they forge another will," Dad said, "my attorney already knows where the originals are." Attorney? Not the one from the funeral. A different one. Dad smiled sadly into the camera. "He promised me one thing. He'll never reveal himself unless they make the first move." At that exact moment, someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 slow knocks, then silence. I checked the peephole. No one. Only a small white envelope lying on the welcome mat. Across the front, written in neat black ink, were 6 words that made my heart stop. "You should have stayed silent." Emily stood frozen for several seconds before opening the apartment door. The hallway was empty. No footsteps. No elevator sound. Whoever left the envelope had disappeared as quietly as they had arrived. Inside was a single photograph. It showed my father shaking hands with an older man had never seen before. Written on the back were 5 words. "He knows where everything is." There was also a business card. No company logo, just a name, Michael Reeves. A phone number. I called. Immediately, the man answered after the second ring. "I've been expecting your call." "Emily, you knew my father?" "For almost 40 years. He said you were his attorney." "I was much more than that." We agreed to meet in his office the next morning. Unlike the expensive downtown law firms, his office occupied the 2nd floor of an old brick building. Nothing about it looked impressive, until he unlocked a fireproof cabinet. Inside sat the original estate file. Every page had been notarized months before my father's death. Every signature matched, every witness was present, and the real will was exactly what my father had promised me years earlier. His estate would be divided fairly. My childhood home belonged to me. The investment portfolio was protected by a trust. There was even a handwritten note attached. "If anyone presents another will, assume fraud immediately." Michael looked at me. Your father suspected they would try this. Why didn't you come forward after he died? Because he instructed me not to, I frowned. He wanted to see who would betray him. Michael placed one final folder on the desk. This is what destroys their plan. Inside was the forensic accountant's complete report. Every stolen dollar, every fake company, every forged signature, every illegal transfer, every email, every timeline, everything connected Diane and Brandon directly to years of financial fraud. They didn't just steal your inheritance, Michael said quietly. They stole from your father while pretending to care for him. Within 48 hours, the evidence was delivered to the probate court, state investigators, and the insurance companies tied to the estate. The forged will was immediately challenged. Bank records confirmed the transfers. Digital experts proved the signatures on the fake will had been copied from older documents. The attorney who presented it admitted he had relied entirely on paperwork supplied by Diane. A month later, the court ruled the forged will invalid. The original estate plan was restored, but losing the inheritance wasn't Diane and Brandon's biggest problem anymore. Investigators uncovered years of tax fraud, identity fraud, wire fraud, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The criminal charges came one after another. Neither of them looked confident when they walked into court. Neither of them looked at me. They already knew the game was over. Several months later, I returned to my father's house. For the first time since his funeral, I unlocked the front door with my own key. Everything felt exactly as he'd left it. His favorite chair, his old jazz records, his reading glasses resting beside an unfinished crossword puzzle. Sat quietly in the living room and opened the final sealed envelope from box 218. His handwriting filled the first page. Emily, if you're reading this, then justice finally caught up with them. I knew money could disappear, houses could be stolen, even wills could be forged, but character always leaves evidence behind. I didn't leave you an inheritance because you were my daughter. I left it to you because you earned my trust every single day. Never let bitterness become your inheritance. Let integrity be the only thing people remember when they speak your name. I couldn't stop the tears. For the first time since losing him, they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of peace. My father hadn't lost. His truth had simply taken longer to be heard. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't destroying the people who betrayed you. It's living the life they tried so desperately to steal. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments what you would have done in Emily's place. And if you believe the truth always finds its way to the surface, share this story with someone who needs that reminder. Thank you for being part of Legacy Whisper. Sometimes one forgotten letter is all it takes to expose a lifetime of lies.